Well, I'd say the first contemporary circus company in the UK. It's based in London, called Caboodle, and they were doing a kind of theatre. Really, there were mainly actors and clowns, kind of new clowns, Festival of Fools type clowns, uh, doing very basic circus skills, and so making a story. They did a show called Monkey, based on the Chinese legend of the monkey god, and so it was a story, and then they had a bit of trapeze and a bit of juggling, and so that was very inspiring. So that, anyway, I won't tell the whole story, but that was very inspiring. And then I kind of I did cabarets and sort of popular entertainment, learning skills, tourist restaurants and things like that in London, but also doing a lot of fringe theatre. So this thing of doing theatre and circus in parallel over quite a few years. Sometimes I'd just be doing theatre, and then other times I'd do like a summer show with my own company, and then after several years I went and did some training in Paris for having worked professionally, and I trained with a chap called Jacques Lecoq because I was interested in masks, and so that was the whole. I had this sort of art school background a bit, and so I was interested in the visuals, and so, but all the way through this, I'm looking at the beginnings of contemporary circus. So, the Peter Brook did a show in the early 70s, 72. Peter Brook was a director of the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time, and he did a version of Midsummer Night's Dream, which trapezes and a bit of very basic, plate spinning and a bit of acrobatics. I mean, it was very, but it was the fact that it was theatre people were getting interested in circus. Back. I'm mixing all this up now. I'm right off my script already. But so right from the early 20th century, Picasso and people like that started to get interested in what the aesthetics of circus, what that looked like, playing with Harlequin images and the late Commedia dell'arte. So yeah, by the 60s. A lot of theatre people, left-wing theatre people, were interested in popular forms. So there was that play, Oh What a Lovely War, that used music hall forms, songs and dance and things like that. It was about the First World War and reflected that. So in a way, Peter Brook's thing was a follow-on from that, using circus with Shakespeare, and there was a kind of way in. So there's kind of if you like, this was a new thing with the sort of the educated academic, whatever, middle classes getting involved in this sort of popular form, and it sort of shifted it. But I'm going to go back a bit. Because mainly what I want to talk about today is the way circus reflects its kind of context. It's what the society it's in. It reflects it, and it has to, because it's a very fluid form. If you think about it, in theatre, there's sort of plays are written, there's set text. There's in music, there's kind of operas. There's things laid down. And even with dance, ballet gets very systematized, and it's all very carefully choreographed, and that is all fixed in time. It's all written down. Whereas circus, you think about it, is very fluid. It's very it shifts according to whatever's going on in society. It's reflecting that in certain ways, and that's not. I think it's not widely recognised, and so if we think about what we're doing today and what we might do in the future, we can think about how to make our work relevant or a, part of the society, rather than there can be a slight tendency for Circus to get very inward focused, very inward looking. It gets very specialist. It gets very there's all these tiny specialisms. So you're not. It's not just juggling, but you're into that particular hat manipulation or whatever, and then you get into not just hat manipulation, but that particular move that nobody else does in your area. So with that, you become quite empowered and quite special. And I'm the person who does that trick. And it's so you get these kind of mini bubbles, these mini kind of. So everyone's a specialist in a way. Everyone's got that little combination of the thing they do, because of course we've all got different bodies and different personalities. So we will be unique in what we do. If as long as you're trying to be who you are can be best at, which is you, rather than trying to be someone else, you'll be special. But there is that kind of the danger with that. These little mini bubbles is that it becomes all about being the specialist, your own specialist, your own, and this sort of links to complexity theory. I won't get too complicated about it, but it's all about specialisms. Or one aspect of it is, the more specialist you are, the more vulnerable you are if there's changes in the environment. So if you think about evolution, so Darwin going to the Galapagos Islands, and he's finding all these birds that have got a special beak that fits in a particular flower at a particular time. And they thrive in that area because there's no, the ecology is in balance. But if there's climate change, or if the Europeans come and they bring, I don't know, rats or whatever, then the environment starts to change, and those specialist animals then become very vulnerable. And in the sort of whereas you take the rat. It's very adaptable. It can live anywhere. It can live in the cities. It can live, So adaptability is a really crucial thing for survival. And so specialisms can make you quite vulnerable to shifts in let's say in Circus, in the economy, or in the that where now we are in a very as all the arts are, very vulnerable to economics, which is also affected by climate change and the bigger global pictures, and all the multi-crises that are happening around the world. So how do we find ourselves? How can we look, see where things are going to go, in order that we can pitch our energies for survival, because it's economic survival and and sort of mental health survival. We have to survive. Things are, as we all know, things are not looking good around the world. So as circus artists, you're vulnerable, because circus artists have always lived on the edge. They have to be fluid. They fit round. If you think of the main stream, you can think of a river that's got a kind of a flow down the middle channel, and Circus is like the little eddies around the edges. You know, it kind of flows, it has swirls, it kind of eddies, and it's part of it's connected to the main stream, but it's kind of it sort of plays on the edges. It's affected by it and then moves away from it and then comes back in. So Circus is very peripheral. It's always been peripheral. And always, you know, entrepreneurial, always trying to fit in and reflect what's going on. So if you think of the earliest, right back to, you know, the reinvention of circus, or the European invention of circus, the very word circus was trying to go back to the classical period, the Romans, and the kind of had really nothing to do with Roman circus, but it was kind of the idea of the referring back to the pre-medieval times and sort of trying to recover some of the it's related to the classical architecture that were people up pillars and all that sort of things. So there was that connection, and of course it was also reflecting the colonialism that was going on. So Astley, you know, invented circus in London in the 1780s. He was a military man. You know, he'd been fighting in the 30 Years' War, so he did cavalry tricks, you know, horse tricks, and it was kind of out of that military trick riding thing. And then through the early years of circus, the first phase of it, there was a big connection with militarism and patriotism. The Battle of Waterloo got reenacted by circuses for about 30, 40 years, you know, ending in, you know, the big cannons, you know, lots of marches, lots of flags, lots of horses running around, gunpowder and smoke, and then the defeat of Napoleon. There was a whole number where, you know, Napoleon's horse would get shot out from under him, and that would die, and everybody would go, "Oh, the poor horse," and then Napoleon would sort of fight on valiantly, and then he'd get defeated or arrested or whatever, you know, and everybody would cheer. And a different version in France, of course, where Napoleon becomes a hero and kind of fights back, and you know. So this show went on for really years, until the point where Napoleon is a sort of you know, he's a juggler. He's juggling with his swords, or he just sort of becomes a clown. So his hat becomes a sort of clown hat. So that, patriotic. Don't think of it like that, but there's that. Lots of battles all the way through the 19th century. You're reenacting the wars in Sudan and places like that, or the Buffalo Bill Circus, if you think about it, is a militaristic sort of, it's the defeating of the Native Americans. You know, it's so it's guns and battles and all that. We think of circus being rather charming and sort of folksy and about, I don't know. But that, it wasn't like that in the 19th century. And the other thing was colonialism. So as the British Empire, you know, the circus being a British Empire sort of product, really, is going around the world. But the other European nations are going into Africa and bringing back exotic animals. So you get all the elephants coming and the tigers and the, they're bringing them back to show the ordinary British public, working class, who don't have access to other forms of, there's not many zoos, although early zoos are associated with circuses. There's as you went into the old circuses, to be a menagerie, a big tent where they'd show wild animals, and like whale bones, and then exotic peoples they'd show. There would be the people, the bearded ladies, and the people who were deformed, or even people being just wild, wild people from Africa, wild people, or wild Eskimos. The Eskimos would do their wild dancing, and so this Buffalo Bill thing, showing the Native Americans doing their wild dancing, and people go, oh, that's so sort of dangerous and edgy, and so right back to Roman times, there'd been this thing of showing exotica, showing camels and bears and the hippopotamuses and zebras and whatever. So this was a way of, framed under education, showing the people what the empire contained, but more, there's a kind of there's a bigger narrative going on about dominance, about the white European male commanding or controlling the untamed, wild, exotic, dangerous. So either wild animals or wild people, or so you think lion tamers. That's exactly what's going on. As a white male, muscular and tough, and being whipping and prodding, and taming the wild, and it's the whole that 19th century. We're still living with that idea of exploiting nature. We command it. We control it. That sort of goes right into our attitude to the environment now. There's still this old idea that the natural world is there for us to exploit and control and draw things out of. So the 19th century, you've a later phase of colonialism, when the world is being more explored. You have polar expeditions, so then you get the performing seals and the performing penguins and Eskimo polar bears, things like that coming in. So that's kind of showing what's around. Then there's a brief period in the early 20th century where you get the circus then becomes more, because there's changes going on. So there's one of the things is the gradual emancipation of women, and throughout the 19th century, circus. There's a great book called Circus Bodies, some of you might know it, but about the way women started to do muscular roles in circus, and in order to perform all these sort of trick riding or whatever, they couldn't wear the long Victorian dresses. They had to wear their sort of their underclothes, really, so just a sort of white, I don't know what you call it, really, but leggings and a sort of short dress thing. But this would be like amazing in the Victorian times because it's bodies. You see body shapes, and it's kind of, and it's both empowering and freeing and edgy and dangerous, but also a bit erotic. It's kind of, so there's a whole aspect of circus being not for kids. Wasn't for kids at all. This was a sort of adult entertainment because it was so, the wild animals and the wild women and all that it was very edgy, and kids weren't invited into circus until the sort of 30s in America. Then you've got the very big three-ring circuses, and they wanted to expand their audience, and so that, you know, bring the families in. So yeah, the early 20th century, you've got more cross-dressing. You've got non-binary people coming in, being performers, people who were, nobody knew whether they were a man or a woman until they died. It's a big, like, oh, they were, and that was kind of interest, it's sort of edgy. Then in the middle part of the 20th century, you get the wars. So, and that really shifts things. And it then throws back. Well, there's several things happening. There's the I'm going to go back a bit, actually. I've forgotten a few things in the 19th century. One of the things was technology that was coming in during the Industrial Revolution. So there are descriptions of circus posters where the main act is a light bulb, an enormous light bulb being, they sort of gear up a dynamo, and then this massive light bulb would then start to glow, and people go, wow, that's fantastic. Electricity, wow, it's going to change everything. And then they would kind of, you get these sort of pseudoscience things going on, sort of magicians, hypnotism was coming in, and people got the idea that you could shift the social structure a bit because you had all these aerial things. It would be a kind of, even the tent itself was an amazing feat. It's like a really modernist thing to go into these enormous structures that had temporary structures that it would be a miracle. At the edge of town, they'd erect these massive things, and it's because you had the Industrial Revolution and you had the means to create massive bits of canvas quite cheaply. So that in itself was a kind of miracle. And then you had all these aerialists kind of flying around, and it was kind of anti or sort of proposed the idea that the old aristocracy would then become the landed people, the people with land would become sort of irrelevant once you've got the people flying in the air. Everything was possible. You could restructure society, women and men, and the social hierarchy and all that sort of thing. So it was all sort of really exciting ideas at that time. And a friend of mine, Leo Bassi, was telling me about his family that introduced, so another little technological thing, that roller skates came in, and they thought, well, we don't, so it's about participation. People want to do roller skating. It's the new thing. So they just converted the whole tent to a big roller skate sort of surface, and people paid to do roller skating, and they did that for a few years until it became less fashionable. It wasn't a big deal, but there was that kind of fluidity of kind of what do people want to do? What's the sort of zeitgeist? What's going on? Let's piggyback on that. Leo Bassi talks a lot about that, about kind of what's going on, piggyback on that and kind of ride on that thing. Anyway, I'll leave that bit out. So mid 20th century, you're getting near to contemporary circus now, which is where I'm trying to get to. So in the 50s, you've got the re-emergence of the heroic male. It comes out the Second World War, and so women's, having sort of been fairly emancipated, they then start to be reduced to So trapeze acts, you'd have the woman in a sort of spangly bathing suit with a plume feather, being a sort of horse. Why is the plume? Anyway, presenting the man on the trapeze, the heroic male who would do all the tough stuff. And the women didn't swing, they didn't do anything like that. They just presented. And there's still circus schools in Europe now who teach you how to present. You have to cross your legs slightly, and then you have to wave one hand, and then
we'll take note.
And, all right. And it's a thing. You have to, and you do that smile, and then you have a half turn and all that. Anyway, so. And the other thing you've got going on is so this is 50s, 60s now, you've got space happening. Space is a big deal, so you get sort of Sputnik acts, satellites and all that sort of thing. And America is a big, top nation now. So you think about the aesthetics of certainly the 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of traditional circus still have it, the stars and stripes. You associated with circus, and it came from the American flag. It was very hugely patriotic in America, of course, and that's where the big circuses were, the massive three-ring ones. And pop music, that's the other thing. It's becoming very technological and electronic, let's put it like that, in a very analog sort of way, electronic. But pop music, and then a Russian circus then starts to imitate the American circus. That becomes the dominant style. So this is kind of that's the circus I remember, traditional circus I remember as a kid. And it seemed quite tacky and kind of old and tired, and it was sort of nostalgic, but it was sort of trying to invent itself, and it's very so the influx of theatre people, middle class, coming into circus sort of really shifted it. And so in the 70s now we've got a kind of several things happening. There's partly a nostalgic reaction. So the early circus stuff I was involved in was a kind of throwback to fairground. People looked at fairgrounds and the rural fairs as a kind of model. So there was a company called Footspan in Cornwall, and sort of what Caboodle were doing were kind of mummers plays. It was sort of folksy and low key, and had a sort of, and Welfare State were doing that. There's a company called Welfare State. There was, they were sort of puppeteers, visual artists who had and did a kind of circus, but not with skills. I mean, a few skills, but hardly anything. Music, images, shadow puppets, all those sort of things. But a kind of rough aesthetic. It was deliberately not slick and plastic and it was all homemade music, live music rather than pre-recorded music. Less flashing lights. It's more by firelight or torches or things like that. So more kind of hippie folksy. In France at this time, you've got the early archaeos who are travelling around with a horse and cart, trying to recreate a kind of a circus from the 1930s, 1950s, so some of it becomes nostalgic. But there's also in the 70s the kind of challenge to some of the norms. So there's a kind of reaction against it really happens in the 80s. I mean, the 80s is a time of massive change where you've got the free market opens up. So you've got capitalism, globalization happening everywhere. So there's money being made, and then you've got you've got the miners' strike, and there's a lot of political battles going on, and you see this in Circus. Absolutely this binary thing between a company called the Archaeos that some of you may have heard of or seen clips of or something like that, who were a kind of punk circus, really rough aesthetic, black, leather jackets and punk rock music and thrashing it out, and then they ditched their horse and cart sort of folksy look and used motorbikes instead of horses, and electric guitars instead of violins or whatever. Lots of fire, lots of spikes, lots of chainsaws, lots of dealing with a lot of fetish objects of the commercial world. So they would take the car being the sort of the symbol of the modern age or whatever, the fetish object. Oh, I polish my car, I wash my car, I buy a new cars. So they would sort of cut them in half, or and so they split, or they just crash them, or they just like pick them up and dump them, and they just smash them or fill them with, just reinvent them, the car as an aquarium, with sort of somebody just like full of water. You could see it sort of. So they'd smash cars, smash up televisions. So there's this kind of, and they would. It had this really rough street aesthetic. They would literally take people off the street. People would turn up and say, "Look, what can I want to join your circus." And the director would say, "Well, what can you do?" And one chap said, "Well, I do a great dog imitation. I can bark like a dog." "All right, go and try do your barking thing, then let's see it." And he'd do it, and then Pierre would say, "Great, you're in. That's great. We'll have that. That's great." Now the chap said, "Well, I can't really do anything, but I'm up for anything. So can we strap fireworks to you and just set you off?" And yeah, I'll do that, whatever. So literally, he's just covered in fireworks, and they just set him up, disappears in his thing. And, so it's just people, and they were the first group to bring BMX bikes into, street kids, bringing them into the show, because they'd park up in these sort of the waste ground on the edge of industrial cities, and that's what they found the kids were into. Okay, let's bring in the circuit. That's really clever. That's really good, And they would challenge all the stuff. So you'd have strong women doing doubles work with a slight, gay edge to it, and you have, very, very. There's a lovely camp guy doing aerial rope for the first time. They're inventing new bits of equipment, and it's like very. And his whole thing was about the beauty and the roughness. So there's a classic photo of a guy holding a chainsaw with one hand and the violin with the other, and it's sort of like the art with the kind of with this kind of rough, anarchic, violent aesthetic. And it's like we're doing these two things. We're telling beautiful stories. They did a whole thing with disability. They had a guy who was, he had an extraordinary body. He was basically just a torso with a head and a tiny little arms. So they had him in a wheelchair, and but they give him a powerful role. He would be like kind of directing the whole thing, and then later on there would be a kind of revolution, and some guards would sort of just pick him up and put him in a dustbin. It's kind of like shocking, kind of so really dealing with difficult subjects, and a lot of shock. They had beheadings and running into the audience, you know, very. The first time I ever saw them in London in '88, as the audience is going in, and it's not like a normal tent. It's just like a rigging structure, a dome, a metal dome, or a sort of scaffold dome with kind of ropes inside. But the audience is just going in, trying to find their best seat, and then there's a kind of argument amongst the cast, and they start to throw chairs around. So the audience is kind of, where do we sit? You know, what are we meant to do? Where are we meant to go? You know, and there's like chairs being thrown, and the audience kind of, you know, where am I? You know, what? And it kind of all settles down. But the whole thing is kind of edgy, and they start with explosion under the seats. It's kind of like, you know, and then people start coming out of the roof, and they were into French culture, so they had a sort of Jesus figure being kind of, you know, being crucified while laughing, a bit like at the end of Life of Brian. So yeah, so they were, you know, kind of sensational really, and really picked up on the zeitgeist and really this punk aesthetic. Whereas on the other side, you had Cirque du Soleil started as street performers, then got massively funded by the Canadian government. So throughout the 80s, you've got this thing where countries that maybe feel not slightly inferior with their culture. What is our culture? So Canada and Australia pump loads of money into a popular art form in order to raise circus up and make it a kind of sort of socialist art form in a way. So anyway, by this time, the same year, '88, Cirque du Soleil is doing a show at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, just along from Our Chaos is performing, and they're doing, it's very pretty, it's very, you know, really well produced, on a stage, lovely costumes, nice music, perfect choreography, very pleasing, you know, very commercial, very, you know, this won't shock. You could bring all your family to this and it'll all be fine and there'll be no challenge and all that. And of course that's, you know, so we know who won in that kind of competition between those two. Our Chaos, you know, they took too many drugs. They expanded massively. So they had 3 or 4 companies going around the world, around Europe. Their tent in Southern Ireland blew away in a storm because they hadn't guided it down, and you know, there was permissions, and they offended all their sponsors, and they just like, we're just going to do it, we're just going to go for it, and you know, and it just exploded basically. And whereas Cirque du Soleil went on to, you know, become a multinational literally, and now, you know, it's you know, tons of money, loads of shows in Las Vegas, and but very well. You could say they're a bit safe, but certainly that was their very commercial. Let's put it. They can fill their slickness, but there's a kind of arguably a kind of emptiness at the heart of Cirque du Soleil. One of the last shows I saw in the Albert Hall was about creation myths. How did culture start? Things like that. And it was a mishmash of sort of North American indigenous people. Well, not really, but people in feathers and doing a kind of roller skate act. And then there was a sort of guru figure singing an opera, sounding really profound and mythic, and you know, but it was just gibberish. It just sounds profound. It sounds great and magnificent, but it was completely meaningless. It was just yeah. So there's a kind of emptiness, and they were just sort of picking things from different cultures and trying to make them into a kind of whole world culture, which in itself is very very colonial, I think. So anyway, the 80s are a time of contention, kind of different things going on. The 90s, you've got with much more celebratory. There's a kind of suddenly there's been a reconnection of traditional circus and contemporary circus. So with Cirque du Soleil, it starts to be on a format of traditional circus, a series of acts with a loose frame around it, but it's not sort of contemporary in any other sort of way. You've got contemporary dance and things like that. It's very, very mainstream, very mainstream. The other thing we haven't mentioned is animals, of course. In the 80s, you were challenging, there was a big division between the traditional circus and the new circus, and mainly about the animals issue. And I would, attached to that was different ideas about the environment and our attitudes to the natural world. It was very different. And I've kind of mentioned the roles of women. So in Cirque du Soleil, for example, just back to that, so they dealt with the male-female sort of issues by just making everybody androgynous. So you just have these skin-tight costumes where you couldn't really tell, are they men or women? You just like avoid gender, let's get rid of it. So there's this 90s was about investment in circus becoming into the mainstream. So in the UK, you've got the centre of the Millennium celebrations in the Millennium Dome is a circus show. It's literally the circus has come to the centre. It's no longer eccentric. It's actually totally incentric, if that's a word. So it's kind of arrived, and so the 90s, the 2000s going to that is a time of excess. That the economy's booming, everything's going well. Where shows get bigger, more expensive. There's more shows everywhere. There's investment. There's until there's the financial crash, and then we've got we're coming into the present times now, and two things happen. One, nostalgia kicks in. So whenever culture is under threat, people look backwards to a golden time when it was, when things were better. You've got a lot of the Brexit sort of ideology was just kind of thrown back to the 1950s or something like that. They want to, you want cricket on the green, and you want teas in the vicarage, and I don't know, what's sort of looking back to a Britain that's gone. So there's that happen. So in circus, you get sort of retro circus. It's kind of recreating a circus that never really existed, but this is the kind of children's picture book version of circus. But at, a time of also survival. How are we going to survive? And that starts to kick in as gradually through the tens. Arts money starts to disappear. All the venues go. It's all the little arts centres have disappeared, and the bits of community funding start to dry up everywhere because it's, governments find it hard to subsidise something as sort of frivolous as circus. But, it's not frivolous for us, but for the wider society, it's like it's seen as kind of froth. You can just get rid of it off the top of your beer, and it's just gone, and nobody noticed. But the other thing that's happening is identity. So circus is then getting into diversity and identity. Who are you? What is the? So this makes for smaller, more individualistic sort of shows. I'm going to do a show about who I am as an artist, or what is the nature of rote work, or whatever. It's very kind of personalised, and it's partly economics, because you can make these small shows that can have a lot of impact because they're true. You're not pretending to be someone else. It's about authenticity. But yeah, and with that diversity of all sorts, exploring, where you come from, and all whatever that may mean, culturally or geographically or whatever, and that makes it very interesting. But and sort of making it quite academic. The other thing that's happening is universities are getting interested in circus, and they're making it, there's degree courses going on. So it's giving it an intellectual dimension. Anyway, so that kind of brings us to the 20s, where we are now, and of course we're facing crises. We've got, we've had COVID, and we've had there's the kind of breakup of units, and this sort of struggle between the idea of we're all in this together, the world, the circus, the circus company, whatever that unit is, or we're just fighting for ourselves. It's just me against everybody else, my family, my group over the other group, and there's that kind of so there are those two sort of ways to respond to what's going on, and one is who knows what will happen with that. It's easy to be pessimistic about it. So I think. So back to the zeitgeist thing, I think it's about what, how do we make work that is somehow responds to the world that's going on, that will be going on? What do we? So obviously things like the climate crisis, and here I'm not. It's not just doing a show about the climate crisis. There might be, it's not just the sort of subject matter of your shows, it's also about the way you do that, the community you bring into that, whether you bring people together, you make some kind of solidarity, you improve mental health. It's basically, are you doing this in isolation? You just do your circus thing, and you kind of ignore what's going on, or do you do it in a way that engages with the way people who are not in circus experience the world, and how do you do that? I mean, it's not there. Then there's so many different ways to do that. You can do it directly or indirectly, or I mean, even, this event, it's, bringing people together. It's got, all credit to Ken and Tina. It's kind of really important that there is solidarity, and there's a sort of let's think about, I guess what it's for. It's not, what it's for you is it's fun, it's thrilling, it makes a bit of money, it's exciting, it's a great community, and so all those are real positive things. But there can be other things as well as that that placed you with that sort of zeitgeist. I mean, in a cynical way, how are you going to piggyback on the environmental issues that are going to go on, or the how are you going to cope with what could be a very severe financial crisis that's going to happen. With immigration, which is going to happen more with climate change, etc., etc. So I think you're, as a sector, as a society, you're in a very good position to respond to all that, because you're fluid, because you do different things. But it's just that thing. Beware of being in a bubble where you just get to. And I'd say it's not, because I don't know this scene particularly, but I know it in other contexts, in other places, and where people are very inward focused. They start to do circus about circus, and that's a kind of death, I think, a kind of death of an art form. When it happened, I saw it happen with theatre, or with mime, physical theatre, where it's your subject matter is about your own genre, your own style. It's a kind of you're just performing to the people that know, your in crowd, and then that gets really sort of precious, and of course you become vulnerable, because that gets a tinier and tinier audience. Lecoq used to talk about, he went to see Grotowski, who was a famous theatre director in the late 20th century, and Lecoq just shook his head and said, like, more and more, Grotowski only wants to perform to the cognoscenti, the people who know about his work. And he'd limit his audience to like 30 or 40 people from Europe, who would be the audience who would understand his work and to really appreciate it. And of course that, that 30 or 40 becomes 10, and then, and basically, Lecoq things like, it's very important to engage with the public, have response, have a sort of dialogue, have a kind of because that informs your art, keeps it fresh, keeps it vibrant, and stops it sort of becoming stale, inward facing, inward looking. So that some of that academic aspect, attitudes to circus, I sort of question a little bit. It's interesting. It's all interesting stuff to explore. But it becomes like very fine art, appreciated by a few rather than the many. But that's. But there are many different sorts of artists. There are kind of. I wrote a book about street theatre where I identified like 5 different sorts of artists involved in street theatre. So there'd be the entertainers, there's kind of obvious, who just wanted to entertain. There would be the animators, I called them, people who wanted to engage the public and sort of get it's like getting people on stage to act things out, but some people take it quite far, and that the audience becomes the show, and the performer almost like becomes a conductor of the audience. So it's like animating and empowering through that. So that's a really good thing to do. Then there would be the provocateurs who would take that a bit further and actually try to challenge or rock the boat of the public, to disturb them in a way, and that they would start to think about what they were doing. Some of the prevailing attitudes, and then there's communicators, which are have a message. So on one level, that's agitational propaganda kind of work, but having a message, an environmental message or whatever message within the show. And then the performing artists, some people who just want to make pictures and make images, make beautiful experiences. It's about the aesthetic entirely. So there are many. Not everybody's the same, and I wouldn't suggest that you all do things in the same way. There's many angles and many preferences and many, you're all very different people. So it's identifying what are you best at. I remember people say, "Oh, I want to be a provocateur. I want to be," and actually they were rather sort of gentle, nice people who didn't really want to rock the boat very much. So said, "No, you don't be a provocateur. Be an entertainer, because that's what you're good at." But whatever. So it's follow your own path. But I suppose
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay. Well, I kind of wind up now. I think. So going forward, I think it's important, again, thinking about other contexts, that you keep informed about what's going on in the world and have a view to where is it going, in order that you can survive. I mean, survive as artists first, as circus performers, but possibly also as people, and as I say, it's easy to get depressed, but so that there's lots. Although it seems a very depressing time, it's also a time of change and fluidity, and that for circus artists is also a time of opportunity, of actually sort of seeing where's it going, what can you do, how can you help, what can you do that's relevant to the future. Okay, I'll finish there. I think. Yeah.